Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also happening at the end of today's webinar, we will be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is solving the Achilles heel of DevOps quality and speed with test environment management. Our speakers today are Mark Hornbeek, who is the Principal Consultant to Engineering DevOps, and Jeffrey Keyes, who's the VP of Product at Petra. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right. Well, I'm going to put myself on mute, take myself on camera. Jeff, let you get right to it.
Thank you so very much. I love this topic, by the way, as Mark and I were talking about the problems that people were having and kind of going through this stuff. It's so apparent that people struggle in this space. But by way of introduction, I want you to meet Mark. If you haven't listened to him before, it's really cool. He literally wrote the book on how to engineer DevOps. So you got a consultant that has been with enterprise companies transforming their development pipelines for a lot of years. And Mark, I'm so glad to have you with us. And if you're interested in getting your book, what do we do?
Oh, you can go to your website there and do a free download. Wow. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
It's good. I will tell you, if you're wherever you are in your journey, there's always the next step. And there's some great blueprints in this book to help you down this path. One of the reasons Petra helped sponsor this and frankly offer it out is so that you can get this. So by all means, jump to that link, pull that book down. It's actually really good. There's a lot of different things about it. So, but by way of background, Mark, you've been doing consulting and working with big companies. So this topic is, really kind of near and dear to your heart, as well as mine. But what are we going to get out of today? What are we learning?
Well, you're right. This is a topic that I have put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into over the years. I even started a firm myself in this domain at one point in time. So I have a lot of thoughts in this area and experience. Going back, gosh, like maybe 40 years. Originally, I was doing things like this with a large telecommunications company. Anyway, today we're going to talk about, how test environments can affect DevOps in particular how, value streams are dependent on, the efficiency of them are dependent on how well you can set up and tear down test environments efficiently. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about different practices. You can learn about how test environment management works so that you can do this more efficiently. We'll talk about some do's as well as some don'ts. The don'ts are often more interesting for some reason, of how you can, work with test environment management, with DevOps, and in particular, I will be walking through a kind of high level, general maturity model guideline for test environment management that will help you think about and assess your own test environment management and guide some improvements for your solutions related to this.
Perfect. Well, this is a meaty set of topics, so just kind of diving in. I mean, we're going to just dive in and define it and go through it. So let's just dive right in. So the dumb question, what's test environment management? What is it?
Right. So it's, sounds like a big word or phrase anyway. I like to explain things in the context of what I call big picture blueprints. Mm-hmm. If you get a chance to look at my book, you'll see that that's kind of the centerpiece of the book. I have various blueprints for different things. So for test environment management, you take it from the top. You have a DevOps value stream, which is all the different activities and stages from planning through to continuous integration, creating artifacts for delivery candidates, then going through the continuous delivery steps, ultimately doing the deployment into operations. So that's the, in general, a value stream for DevOps. And
Right.
if you notice, at multiple points along that value stream, there's a need to deploy environments for testing. So back at the left side of the picture, developers, usually many developers in most organizations, want to set up a test environment to test their code as they're developing it prior to integration. And then there's usually an integration point where lots of developers are, integrating their various changes into a trunk branch, and there's a, continuous integration or integration test environment set up for that. After there are candidate release artifacts, then there's typically one or more environments set up for acceptance testing in maybe in multiple locations or multiple teams, various ways of doing acceptance and regression and system level testing. And prior to production, prior to a deployment, there's often, again, some test environments set up to, to prepare that, scripts and things for deployment.
Yep.
These are just the things associated with the value stream. There's many other places where test environments are also interesting. If you think about marketing demos and various other applications of test environments, which are not in the diagram, but at least as far as DevOps is concerned and value streams, these are the typical types of test environments. And each of them have a lot of things inside those test environments. There are, the applications themselves that need to be tested, the tools that are used for testing, and the infrastructure, which could be physical, virtual, cloud, other ways of, setting up computers and storage and networks and topologies of those things to make sure that the test environments are, suitable for whatever the particular test is that any one person or, application may be doing. And, in addition to that, these test environments need to be if you like, operated or orchestrated and used. So there's 3 little bubbles in each of those boxes just to represent that, the users could be a manual person running tests and setting up these test environments, or it could be somebody developing, some code for test environments, infrastructure as code, or it could be an API with some automated process setting it up. So this is kind of what it is, and that hopefully answers the what question at least.
Yeah, I feel like, for people listening from a DevOps perspective, you just spoke out against motherhood and apple pie by saying there's something manual going on here. You mean there's people doing manual tests against these?
Well, that's and certainly in a lot of enterprises, I still see many, examples where at least some of these test environments are being handled by tickets, and then somebody, going off and configuring the infrastructure or the applications and different things for testing, and that is a huge source of bottleneck. And then of course you've got the problem that people don't release them, so there's also the issues of utilization, whether you've got a cloud-based resource or other resources. If they're not released efficiently, there's also conflicts of resource and costs involved, and all of that, if it's done manually, tends to be a little less efficient, or a lot less efficient than if it's done automatically.
Yeah, the latest World Quality Report actually stated that somewhere on the order of 40% of environments are still physical, non-virtualized, non-automated, and maybe there's parts of it that are, but what it says is that if you have physical environments that you're deploying to that are still a little bit, hand massaged, and I would guess, that the dev test environments way below, that are connected to the CI pipelines, those are pretty well done and automated, and that's not where people are struggling. Where they're struggling is when the pipelines converge, because there's such a mix of things, and how far do you get in the automation, how much, what team owns it, because it's a cross team kind of thing. And so if that's where you're at, that's okay. The whole point is to continue to evolve wherever you are, and I think that's where test environment management comes in, is to help manage that. And like you said, what is it that happens if somebody doesn't release a resource? Where does it go? Where does it really go from there? So, well, okay, what's the industry say about this?
Well, this is slide basically talks to the general problem of testing and the cost of testing when it's not done efficiently, and test environment management is a huge portion of that. The World Quality Report, the most recent one, was emphasizing that software quality is key, not only for technical reasons, but it's part of underlying business driver. Every major enterprise wants growth, user satisfaction, low cost, and security, and at the heart of getting that is testing, and test environments is a key part of testing, and it's often an misunderstood an underinvested area because it's it's kind of a detail under the hood, but it's very impactful. So if you look at some of the data, there's a May 2020 Undue Research report talking about the real cost of software failures, and again, a lot of this cost comes from the waiting time for testing. 88% of the enterprises in that report were saying they're doing continuous integration, at least in some portions of their enterprise. 35% are deploying code changes hourly, not necessarily to the to production, but within these different test environments. And 26% of developers' time of all their developers is being spent on average, 13 hours just reproducing, meaning setting up and trying to reproduce problems and so they can fix them. That's 620 million hours a year wasted on debugging and setting up test environments. Most of the time it's just getting the environment to try it. 61 billion annually, 1.2 trillion a year, shareholder value loss. I mean, that's just one report. There are plenty others out there that give similar kind of numbers. So what you really want is the holy grail on the right hand side, that little circle diagram, where if you could do it right, you get like DevOps 6 major categories of benefits. You not only get speed with agility, you get stability in the test environments, more efficient, of course, higher quality, security can be part of the testing, and satisfaction because people are happier if they don't have to sit around waiting for test environments so they can continue with their work. So these are just reasons why it's important. Like I say, there's other examples of such reports out there, but definitely that one resonates with me. It seems very real.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and if you get it wrong, a lot goes badly. So why is it important to DevOps?
Right. So, I'm kind of a DevOps centered guy. And so this really rings true to my heart. Orchestrating, managing test environments is, in my experience, not only as an employee, but as a consultant over the years, it's often the primary source of delays and waste in the value stream. Just trying to set up and tear down and make available and not have a lot of waste going on with people not being able to share environments, especially if you have dedicated equipment. But even with cloud resources, people tend to hang on to them longer than they need to. It costs money and time. So overall, then, what you're trying to do is, even at the first level of DevOps maturity, improve agility, reduce waste through orchestrating test environments, reducing bottlenecks in the value stream. If you get into higher levels of maturity, you sort of think about, improvements in higher level aspects of quality management, risk management. Again, by providing more comprehensive and automated assessments, you do that because you can get, the higher speed affords you the opportunity to do that. And finally, enabling improvement by providing more intelligent insights and feedback, because with test environment management, you not only set up and tear down test environments, but you're keeping track of what's going on. You're getting data, metadata, and other information that allows you to get a lot smarter about how you deal with this problem.
Yeah, well, and I remember the first Hudson pipeline we ever set up, and we were on a Microsoft stack, and so we had in unit, and we were building out unit tests, and we were so proud of ourselves. So we had all this suite of unit tests up, and we had them running perfectly. And then we go to do a demo. It's like, hey, let's demonstrate how these things are going. And oh man, it was awesome. We were kicking it off, and then all of a sudden, all of our tests failed, and we couldn't figure it out why. And during the demo, scratching our heads and we had egg on our face, and here it was supposed to be so cool, and yet in the Hudson dashboard, it was like everything failing. And then come to find out, oh, somebody was running a load test on our environment at the exact same time as we were trying to do our demo and didn't know it because we didn't have any clue who else was using our environment. We actually have at Petra, the one line I remember from one of our customers when we did an interview is he said, running tests in their environments was a little like playing Russian roulette. They never really knew what was going to happen and where, because they had no idea who else was using it. And if you go and build your pipelines, the very first, one of the very first steps you do is you integrate a bunch of tests into it as you build out your CI and you get your build going. And if you don't have a stable environment, you don't have a stable anything. You don't have a stable quality signal, as Gary Groover likes to call it. Without that, you can't move forward.
You know, that's an extremely good point. I mean, it's sort of not a side effect, but an actual extremely important benefit of test environment management. People often don't think about. It's not just a matter of setting up, tearing down, and sharing environments, but once you have the ability to do that, you can start to do things like, validate your test environment while the testing is going on. One of the
Right.
most painful things is to find out that your test result was invalid because of side effects, other things
Hmm.
going on in the environment.
Wrong
And
builds and the rest of it. Yeah.
yeah, so you get incorrect verdicts where things are failing and maybe they shouldn't have done, and then people go off to try to investigate the failure, and there wasn't really a failure, there was something going on in the environment. And so, yeah, it's a key point.
Well, presuming that people are here because they've experienced some of these problems, let's talk about, how do you get started? What do you really do? How do you take wherever you are right now and move forward?
Yeah, so on one hand, I would say that this is, topic is, at first glance not simple, but on the other hand, there's a lot of, subtleties. And so in a short webinar, I would break down, how do you do it in terms of 3 steps, like how do you prepare for the test environment management, how do you use it, and what do you do to maintain and evolve it over time. So in terms of how to prepare it, you generally want your test environment management tools and practices to be integrated with things like configuration management, because they need to know what's available to set up as an environment. So
Hmm.
that might be integration with tools like Ansible, Chef, Puppet, or other things that you're using. Maybe just code in a repository, but whatever it is. And then the CI/CD tool chains, because you want to set up test environments and orchestrate the test management at every stage in the pipeline. Then you want to integrate test environment management, things like AWS Code Pipeline, Jenkins, et cetera.
Hmm.
Service management tools, if you're going to have a ticket system or some other way to allow people to request a test environment to be set up. So things like ServiceNow. So these are just examples. A lot of it starts with figuring out what are your use cases and how are you going to integrate them with the tools to affect those use cases. Typically, you start at the dev end and work your way to the right. So, because there's a lot more environments for dev, but the complexity of the environments tends to grow as you go to the right end with integration and, acceptance and pre-prod stages.
And how do you even know which environments you should target first? How do you know, which ones do I want to attack? Which even pipelines?
Right. Yeah, so it does require a strategic approach. You don't just run off and do it without thinking about it carefully. I offer consulting in this area, but the general idea is the knowledge of what test environments are needed is in your test cases, right? I mean, the
Hmm.
tests are the things that are driving the need for the environments, or you may want to refactor those to take advantage of test environment management capabilities as well. So that's another reason why you often really look carefully at your test suites and test case structures to figure out what's the best way to partition and utilize test environment management.
Well, I guess that does take us to the next step is use test environment management to help us get us there. Tell us about using test environment management.
Right, so who are the users? First of all, as I said before, you can have people that are manually operating the tests and the test environment. You can have some people developing and codifying or going through some tools, or you can have just applications that are running test environments. So there's different kinds of users, first of all, but they're all basically trying to accomplish much of the same thing. They
Yep.
want to be able to schedule to run a test, and to do that, they need to, there needs to be a test environment management capability that orchestrates the setup according to some instructions that are usually coming from a test or some other instruction. Then resolving conflict with bookings, which is a key one. Quite often, you have a limited amount of resource for one reason or another, and not everybody can get what they want at the same time. So there's scheduling issues and trying to resolve that so other people that are trying to get an environment know what's going on and when they're going to be able to get their requests resolved. Provisioning and deployment, of course, and then that goes both ways, and setting up and taking down. Getting visibility once the test environments are set up, or just in general, getting visibility of how they're being used is very important from the point of view of capacity management and other factors. And generally speaking, just there's a big issue when a problem is found, let's say by a QA team, and you want the dev teams to be able to reproduce it. Now all of a sudden the dev team needs to reproduce the exact same test environment QA had. So with the test environment management capability, you can orchestrate a handoff to make that whole process a lot more efficient. These are just some examples of, if you like, use cases for using TAM.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that, of course, I'm tainted. I'm a vendor. But the things and the unnatural acts that we see people do before they bring in us as a cloud solution, the various spreadsheets, and frankly, the amount of freaking time that's wasted just saying, you know, can I have this environment and I need it this date, and trying to keep some SharePoint site updated or some spreadsheet. It's like, aren't there better ways of doing that? And you know, we're almost in 2021. Can we please move beyond? I have a managed spreadsheet that I do. Your job's not going away. There's so much more that you can do instead of wasting time just communicating, you know, what is available when and what's on it. Use tools for that, and then, you know, free up your time to do more interesting stuff like automating, validating, providing health metrics, and so forth. The visibility you can provide is massive. Apologies for my little commercial on that, but goodness gracious, stop doing what you've been doing. Do something better. The value to the business is massive, because the biggest problem that I saw and still continue to see is that when a test environment goes wrong, it's not the testers that are wasting their time figuring out, oh, it's the environment. It's the developers, meaning you're taking them off task to go fix an environment crap. Oh my gosh, please, let's stop doing that as an industry. Anyways,
Well, you hit a pretty interesting point, by the way, because I think I often find that the senior management leadership don't understand this issue very well. You know, they think, well, the engineers are taking care of everything, and they're pretty good, so they're doing everything effectively and efficiently.
Right.
But until you really sort of look under the hood and see what's going on, you find out, wait a minute, a lot of our time is just being spent on this issue. We didn't even know it. In fact, I would dare to say that if you ask some senior management, almost any enterprise, more than a large, percentage of them wouldn't understand this issue, and it's so critical.
It is, because I mean, the value you get isn't. We did a survey back with EMA, and the value you get isn't about, hey, you know, it's costing your environments less. It's the fact that you're gonna cut out, I think it was just shy of 2 weeks for every release of stop screwing with environments. That's massive. Anyways, so let's talk about maintain. How do you maintain this then? And what kinds of things, what do you do once you have, what are the interesting things basically once you implement test environment management can you do?
Yeah, so you mentioned the first example. These are some use cases for maintenance where you have health checks on the test environment. The test environment management system is constantly making sure that the environments themselves are healthy, and that information can be used in a lot of different ways, like you mentioned, to avoid false positives and false negatives in testing. You run the test environment management health checks in parallel with testing, and if you've got a failure, you first of all check the environment to see, wait a minute, was the failure caused by an environment rather than the purpose of the test? So that's just an example use case. In general, being able to release and restore environments efficiently. I can tell you so many cases where people are chalking up a big, public cloud bill, and they find out that some engineers had set up their test environment but hadn't released them.
Yeah,
they went for, went for a break or maybe even vacation in some cases, where it was really not managed. Usage reports for how they're being used give you a lot of insights into efficiency and capacity planning. If you need to, allocate more or maybe less, or take care of peak loads during big release times. Having the ability to make change requests to the way test environments are managed itself is important, and things like chargebacks, so everybody kind of knows right away how much is this costing us, so that it's not just left up to the business guys at the end to say, gee, I wish we could reduce this cost, but try to get the information right back to the users. These are just some examples of use cases in the maintenance of test environments. There's a lot more.
Yeah, there's many a war story, I'm sure, here that we can talk about. Many a war story, many a cool thing that you can do. Millions can be saved here, and headaches can be saved by addressing this. It seems like so often in DevOps, we talk mostly about the automation of the pipeline, the tests, and the deployment. We don't talk enough about this, and that's why I'm excited about the environment conversation. I get that it's a lot less difficult once you're dealing with a pure container solution, but ask yourself, how soon until your entire application is microservices based and your service mesh and in production that way, and how soon are you that way in a regulated way where you're doing that across all all applications. If you're there, you still probably have compliance issues, and so you still have to have one for testing and one for production. This problem ain't going away. In fact, it's going to be here a long time, so we got to get good at it. So, well, how do we tell really, how well are we doing? What what do we look at, and how do we, if we want to self-assess, what do we do?
Well, this is a model that I use in my consulting. The general idea is that people ask all the time, well, how do I do something, whatever the topic is, in this case, test environment management, obviously. So my first sort of thought is, well, wait a minute, it depends on where you are in your journey and where you want to get to, right?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is going to be a little different. So I use this analogous to the capability maturity model, 5-level model, but apply it to DevOps. This idea that, at the lowest level of maturity, if you're there, you want to get to the next level of maturity, and
right.
so on and so forth, up to the most mature level. So at the bottom level of maturity, it's chaos, right? Where there's a lot of issues, and we'll talk about what that means. So the next level I call continuous integration, because usually you sort out the front end of the pipeline before you start deploying things a lot faster at the back end. Or asking for problems. And then you get into what's, it's called essentially the first way of DevOps, continuous flow, where you've got end-to-end capability. And then once you've got that in place, then you start optimizing it. To do that, you need a lot more feedback metrics, so continuous feedback. And finally, you get there and you've got all the metrics, and now you can really get into more refinements and continuous experimentation, learning. I just paraphrase that as continuous improvement. So you look at those 5 levels, that will help you give you a framework for how you would answer the question, how do I improve from wherever you happen to be to wherever you want to go? But you have to consider that DevOps is not just about technology, it's also processes and people. So I've got some examples of how to translate this into some practical terms, and some example results I'll talk to as well in the next few slides.
Cool. Well, let's just jump in. So chaos.
Yeah, chaos. So I'd like to say that very few people are still at chaos, but not true.
True.
A lot, especially large organizations, they at least have, almost every organization, good examples of chaos going on with some applications, because many of these enterprises have hundreds of applications, and they're not all at the same level of maturity. Many of them do have, many enterprises have a lot of them at the chaos level, actually. But what this means, if you think about the people, process, and tech, test environment maturity at level 1, chaos, there's generally a lack of understanding of test environment management, really not much in the way of skills. Test environment management really not given priorities by either the leaders or the people doing the work. Processes are really ad hoc. People are just running around saying, I need to set up an environment. Processes are not well defined for test environment management. The technologies, there's lack of tools. There's the test environments are not adequately funded. They're typically done very manually, lack of investment. So some example results. Generally speaking, the ultimate result is you got frequent, severe, and frequent failures and delays in releases. The testing environment is often a bottleneck, but it's not well measured, so people may not even realize it's such a bottleneck. There's generally little ability to diagnose issues. Customers are often, in this case, not happy, and employees are often not happy. I mean, I can give you, a fairly recent example from my consulting. It was a government policy application for a county government, and the application was to replace a manual test environment set up from COTS vendors were providing portions of the application, and there really wasn't a good connection between the COTS vendors and the government organization that was dealing with policy application that consumed it. Integration, therefore, effectively was completely indeterminate amount of time because of the lack of coordination. So their release times were varying all the way from 4 weeks to 3 months, and very, very chaotic. And they wanted to get to 2 weeks. A large part of that solution, the recommendation was to sort out the test environment problem. That's an example.
Yep. I can tell you please, if you take longer than a couple of weeks to create an environment, you should call us because we can help you with that. If you have environments that go down, or you have still tracking environments in spreadsheets, please stop doing that. Just call us because we can help you there. And it's the simplest thing you'd ever believe. It's not worth doing that way. So, well, let's.
Yeah, they were literally doing things like having special meetings and all kinds of things just to start figuring out, hey, what kind of test environment do we need for this COTS release? It's just totally chaotic. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So now this is, I think, where most people are, is they're tinkering in the CI world, or they're making some progress. So what's this look like?
Yeah, so if you go back to that report that I mentioned, apparently a lot of enterprises are at least working with continuous integration, and I do see that, at least at this level. People are, using Agile, and at least from an Agile point of view, they're doing some level of continuous integration. So they're trying to get beyond chaos into something a little more organized. In this case, the generic characteristics are you have some awareness of test environment management. Maybe it's not formal training, but at least people talk about it, and they have some processes in place. There's some basic skills and experience in the organization for how to deal with test environment management. Processes are in place, at least for the integration stage, so they don't have to run around to build an integration environment. They're at least, that's pretty much a solved problem in this case. And
Right.
Most of the test environments they may be manual, or they may be static, or they may have some automation, at least at the integration stage, but the end-to-end, deployment acceptance level is typically still manual at this level. Usually the results accomplished here are the trunk branch is pretty stable because they're using it at integration and getting good integration results, and things are efficient up to the integration stage, but a bottleneck, test environment's a bottleneck for later stages out to deployment. Customers are, for the most part, not particularly happy because of the instability and the scheduling largely because of the deployment end of the process. Again, I could talk about some example. I was working with a very large insurance company. Again, it was a policy app, in this case, insurance policies rather than government policies that I talked about before. They weren't able to complete a release in 4 months. And they wanted to try, their goal was to get their releases down to under two weeks within the next 6 months. Well, that's a huge gap. And, you go through the analysis, and a lot of it had to do with they had no real control over their, acceptance testing and deployment end of their process. They did have integration in place for a lot of their developers, but when it came down to let's build an actual release out of all those integrated parts, it was at that end of the process was still chaos, right? But the integration was in good shape.
And it feels like the majority of people in the industry are, unless unless you're in the group that's, hey, I've already re-architected, I've got an autonomous team and we're already deploying to production. If you ain't all the way there, you're having this experience. And most notably, you're in the CI world. You can tell when a team says, man, we can build things well, we're pretty agile, but it still takes us another 6 months to release our code. Confident, this is where you're at. And they're having, among other problems, there's issues in not just the release process, but the environments of getting coordinated across all the different components that have to be there.
I was literally exacerbated, and this is not that unusual. When I first contacted, this client, basically they were saying, yeah, we already do DevOps really well. And I started to say, well, could you show me what you do? And basically they were doing they had many examples of continuous integration being done well.
Right. Like, woohoo, we got it.
Right.
How long does it take to release? Well, another 6 months. Right. Yeah. Hey, you ain't quite getting there, man. We got to get the value delivered. So, now we actually get to the first way of DevOps, as you call it, the continuous flow. Where does that sit for environments?
Sure. So now you are talking about more of an end-to-end, comprehensive view from left to right across the pipeline. People at this point, to do that, the leadership pretty much has to be somewhat aware of test environment as a key part of that pipeline. So there tend to be a higher level of skills in the organization. Significant portion of the workforce is engaged with test environment management and tools associated with that if they're automated. The processes tend to be in place, at least defined, if not automated, for each stage in the whole value stream, from development through to at least pre-production, if not production setup. And the releases are also orchestrated, the deployment environments, at least for testing purposes. And then from the technology point of view, you now have some form of a test environment management platform, whether it's a commercial one or some homegrown thing, integrated end to end. Now, in terms of results, for the most part, the end-to-end value stream is stable. The test environment management is not a major bottleneck. It still can be a bottleneck. There's always bottlenecks in any value stream. And that's the point of continuous improvement eventually. But customers and employees generally are a lot happier because there's a lot less chaos at the different stages. There are changes going on. Maybe things are a little bit reactive and disruptive because you don't necessarily have all the metrics in place yet, but at least you've got flow working. And
right.
Now you can think about going forward to adding more metrics. An example I'd use here, one of my clients was a global nutrition company. They had in place really good, continuous integration and quite a lot of deployment, but they were moving towards breaking up a large, basically it was a partner application where they allowed partners to make orders for their products. And they were breaking that up into 500 microservices, and all of a sudden test environment management took on a different meaning and dimension. So there are many possible pipelines with each of them needing different environments and the possibility for conflict and all of that across the continuous flow. So they already had some level of continuous flow, but they needed to apply some of their best practices in a broader in a microservices world. And they wanted to get a 50% reduction in the average time to market and lead time while they were doing that. And we found that a lot of the bottleneck was test environment management, applied a test environment management solution to that.
That's exactly the point. And as you get there, the problem of environment management changes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden it's like, it's not about provisioning, communicating, it's about knowing what's there, validating what's on it. I remember an audit person on the audit team basically saying, so if an environment is only around for minutes, do I still need to track where it's at? And massive conversation on that from an audit point of view. Do you need to have it? This is where these solutions can help. So
yeah, that's especially not only audit. I mean, the case you talked about before, where maybe a QA person finds a problem and it needs to be reduced later. First of all, by a developer to fix the problem, and second of all, again, by the QA person to validate the fix. So you want to know that you've got the same environment set up, especially in microservice world. That can happen quite a lot across the organization.
Well, and people start coming up with the mess. It's like, okay, so now your application is actually 500 little applications. I seem to remember this conversation back, in the early days of Windows, and we'd call it, the mess that you'd have with all the different DLLs that are out there. And oh my gosh, how do I figure out what's, valid with what, and tracking all those together? So, well, we better hustle along. We've got a lot more content to get through.
Okay.
Let's see. So continuous feedback. I think we talked about this. We can talk about continuous improvement. This is really the whole valid point of here. Let me just jump here and talking about our maturity model. Here's the high level. Walk us through like where we're trying to get to.
Okay, well, we skipped a couple of slides, but basically, the continuous feedback, continuous improvement level after continuous flow. You're really just trying to get to the idea that, as far as test environment management is concerned, you really want, to the methods and to be as much as possibly automated and to be pervasive across the pipeline in a way that you can, get a lot of data out of the environment and use that data to orchestrate, guide and get inferences for improvement, because there's always bottlenecks. There's always, and often test environment management, even as you get it efficient, you wanted to get it more efficient over time. That's the whole point of getting to level 5. You want to continuously, use feedback and react to it in a smart way and figure out how can you improve further and further as you get more mature with DevOps. This model itself, if you think about, just trying to figure out where am I, where do I want to get to, this is sort of as an at a glance, one page view of sort of a maturity model. You can, red circle which areas here seem to fit your, your situation, and then, go to the left and say, all right, well, which level am I at, and where do I want to get to? Obviously, you want to get to a higher level of maturity. So that's sort of how you use it. This is a very simplistic model. You can do a lot more deep dive assessments, but if you want to, at a glance view of where you are, this is a good way to kind of look at the chart and say, yeah, what words on this chart best fit me, and therefore what level am I at?
Hey, just to jump to one of the questions, it's a really interesting question, and it's the naysayer in the room saying, hey, once I'm at continuous flow, why do I need to do anything more with looking at feedback and anything else? I mean, shouldn't it just work? There's no I love the quote, it should just work. There's no need to slow the process down.
Sure, but how do you know how fast it is and where the bottlenecks are if you don't have enough metrics? And feedback is more than just a saying, right? I mean, there's a lot of dimensions to even just feedback. There's applications, what's going on with the application as far as the environment's concerned, the pipeline itself and all the processes associated with that, and then the infrastructure upon which it runs. So there's sort of three vectors of information that you really want to look at and figure out where, what's contributing to bottlenecks, where are things working well, where are they not working well, and for which applications. So it gives you data to make inferences. Even if things are working well, the whole point is you want to continuously improve if you can, or if you don't, then somebody else is going to, and you're going to fall behind. So you might as well figure out how to do that, and you need the data to get there.
Yeah, it's funny. I know everyone's already heard that you can't manage what you can't measure. I've heard it said you can improve what you don't measure, but how do you actually prove that you improved it? Without data, you have nothing. So you need the data to sort of baseline, and that needs, this model of continuous experimentation and keep practicing is that's the model for everything. That's how we should approach it. Do a baseline, figure out what's next. So, well, let's get into practical how you do this, and we've got about 7 minutes for a whole lot of content, but that's okay. I like it.
Okay.
How do we do this?
We're having too much fun, I guess. Yeah, so I'll talk about 4 different things. I have a generic kind of DevOps transformation blueprint. It's in the book, but I'm not trying to get everybody to read the book.
Read the book.
So I'll breeze through that and talk about some advice of what to do, what not to do, some examples as well.
Okay, well, let's just dive in.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So take us through it.
All right, so this transformation blueprint, honestly, I apply it to all kinds of things, not just for DevOps, in fact, but I often find that the first step is to get leadership on the same page as to what their goals are. If you don't do that, then you're somewhat asking for trouble later because they're the ones that are sponsoring it and providing budgets and stuff like that. So start with visioning, and then they in turn should be helping to get alignment with their teams, assign metrics and goals at a more detailed level, not just people, but also process and tech, give some scope of guidelines. Then go through a deep dive assessment. I have something called a 9 pillars assessment, but there's other ways to do it too. Do a value stream mapping, figure out where your bottlenecks are, and test environment management is typically what pops out there. And finally, use the results of that assessment to build a solution roadmap and figure out where you want to go, get agreement with that, with the management team and the folks that are going to be involved in doing the work, decide what the metrics are going to be for measuring progress, then go ahead and start building it. Build some MVP, build some model application, get some training in place, deploy a solution, put in place some governance, validate that things are working well, then operationalize the solution once it's working well. Start to really measure it in detail. Things like using SLAs, SLOs, some of the SRE constructs and ideas, for example, to build retrospectives in place, really figure out how to make improvements. Ultimately, once you have something you're really happy with, then expand it across the enterprise to many other applications and other groups, and get feedback and get into the continuous improvement cycle.
Rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a pretty generic process. It may seem daunting, but it's where to go. So what to do is, what is it? What do we do?
Yeah, so start with leadership. Again, make sure that they're available and open to sponsoring the initiative, because that's critical to making progress.
And
And often
just to
that, and
interject, if somebody needs help here and you don't really sure what to say to leadership,
yeah,
you can contact either of us and we'll help you with that process.
yeah, understand the benefits, get some training in place, map out the value stream so everybody can see visually where the bottlenecks are and why test environment management is a key part of all of that. It often amazes me when we go through a mapping session, eyes are opened when they see, wait a minute, we're spending that much time in
Right.
test environment.
Yeah.
So
Let's get our build time down from 12 hours to, 6. Oh, and then it'll sit for, a month on a test environment. You're focusing on the wrong problem.
Well,
Sorry.
often you're looking close at one stage, any one person, but when they see the whole value stream laid out and they add up all the time being spent on test environments, the number gets to be shocking. When
Yep.
you take a big picture look at it.
If you
Then
haven't
follow
done
up.
a test environment or a value stream map of your flow, please do that, and then you'll spot like, I can see where those environments are, and just map that out. It's a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So put in place some metrics, measure everything, make sure you iterate and tune it. So those are things to do. Short
Probably the
list of
most important is, what to not do. What should you not do?
So the first thing I always see is, many organizations, the engineers just want to go off and do it on their own without
Woohoo!
getting a lot of, support, a lot of interaction with the people, because engineers like to work with things rather than people mostly. But that's the wrong thing to do. You want to make sure everybody's bought into the way it's going to work, get the right workflows, then decide what framework for the tool will be used rather than just having the engineer create their own thing,
Yep.
which often happens as well. Making sure that test environment management is in the investment and the budget. Don't just assume it's going to happen without any budget. That's usually not a good thing. Don't divorce test automation from test environment. They are related, so try to couple those together. Make sure that the tests are defining the test environments that they need. Making sure you've got the right metrics in place to tease out what's going on with the test environment and how to utilize it better. And for the most part, don't evolve your solution without the metrics, because you don't know where you're going without that visibility.
Spot on. I would just give an amen, brother. So walk us through an example. How did we do before? What did we do afterwards, and why? Because this is probably the most interesting part of it. Like, this is, wherever you are, you could set something up like this and see something similar. So walk us through what happened.
So I actually mentioned this example before in the level 2 maturity discussion. This is a large enterprise insurance company with an insurance policy application, large application. There were many weeks, 4 months in fact, trying to make a release, and they still hadn't actually accomplished it. A lot of it had to do with their lack of control of the, literally, hundreds of developers and testers involved and all over the world, trying to in different world locations, and without really having any process in place, manual, let alone automated, for dealing with the test environment problem. And yet they wanted to accomplish a 2-week release cycle. So there are a lot of changes needed, but when you broke it down, you found out that, the people side, the developers, none of the developers, only 5% of QA were using automated testing, and they were all manual setups. Processes, 30% of their tests were automated, manual test setups and release completely across the board without a lot of guidance. The technology, they were using Jenkins for CI, but there was no test environment management platform or concept of one. And the solution, to accomplish the 2 weeks that the roadmap called for 80% of the staff being trained on automated testing and test environment management. Tools team was to be assigned processes to accomplish 85% test automation, where test would automatically trigger the test environment setup and environment release for each stage. And the technology, there was a test environment management platform. In fact, it was Petra in this case that was recommended, and the tools upgraded to integrate with that. That's my example.
That's spot on. And what happened, I mean, was the process of implementing this, the cultural and all that, how did, talk a bit for just for a second about the culture of this, because certainly it was a process.
Yeah, so it was an interesting culture. When I did my recommended readout, I was a little nervous. They literally brought in a security guard because because there were different people responsible for different stages in testing and test environments, and they were kind of proud of what they had. But when you looked at the big picture, it was pretty obvious it was dysfunctional. So changing that culture, they literally had to change out a senior manager, and it happened right in that meeting. It was a little embarrassing for me, to tell you the truth. As I was reading it out, then the room was getting warmer. So that's just an example of a cultural artifact. But changing culture to deal with this problem can be traumatic for organizations that haven't really thought about this before very well. But when it's clear that this is where the bottleneck is, then you have to deal with it. And indeed, people have to change their thinking around it and to make these improvements, to give it priority. I could give you many examples of that, but we probably don't have time.
Well, we don't. It's where the rubber meets the road. And once you get the value stream map set up, where you can look at the process and you can look at how much time is being spent on environments, you can work on solving it. Let me just talk a little bit about Petra for just a moment. As a platform, we basically manage the entire delivery cycle. We're not a tool that does provisioning. We're not a tool that, although we kick tools that actually spin up. We're not a tool that manages the planning, although we integrate with all that and pull it into a single pipeline. The point of value stream management is we give you the visibility and orchestration over the entire process. We're the manager of managers, if you will. So we ingest and communicate with data across the entire pipeline. We normalize that and correlate it together so that you can see from idea all the way into production. And we give you that data correlated from, this change is related to this build, which is related to this deployment, which is going to this environment, which is part of this release, which is part of this amount of test that's all coming together, all the way through the process, so that at any point in time, you can say, where's my feature? What environment does it live on? What's the quality of this thing? We help in the process, or one of the main areas that we have, and almost half of our customers start with working on just test environments, taking wherever they're at, getting off of spreadsheets, getting off of SharePoint sites, or just frankly not having anything at all. We even have a customer that has a whole bunch of outsourced vendors that manage environments, and so they use Petra to actually keep track of who's doing what in the manual world, and provisioning those, and then making improvements, getting utilization, getting conflicts, and putting all that together. We have all that available as part of the package of what is Petra. We top that with rich analytics, comparative analytics, pipeline oversight and traceability with deep audit. This gives you a way to basically look at the value stream and understand where your bottlenecks are at a glance. And the collaboration that's built into the tool basically puts everything together. We allow you to see the different development pipelines and the release pipelines, that is, with a 360-degree view of here's all the different aspects, the systems, progress, the activities, and so forth, and drill in and look at the different environments that they live. All of this is mixed together with a single platform that helps you in your delivery. The whole point is you've got to, without doing this, you don't have really a catwalk over your factory floor. You can't see what's going on in the virtual environment, especially in today when everyone's working remotely. You can't just walk around the office and see how things are going. You can try to Slack people. Well, now with Petra, you can, and you can see exactly where every environment is. You can look at your CD pipelines and understand what's deployed where and how they're fitting together. On a go live weekend, you can orchestrate and puppeteer all the different activities, whether they're automated or manual, across going live. And all these things really give you needed, as I like to say, visibility is what you've been lacking. And with visibility, you get collaboration and efficiencies like you've never seen before. Add automation and templates to that, where you have standardized processes, That's value stream management. You'll bring the whole team together. Start with your environments because it's the easiest to implement. It's the easiest to cost justify. You'll have dramatic impact to your business. So with that, I think we have time for just a couple of questions. There's a question on how does test environment management work with hybrid and multi-cloud deployment?
Okay, well, for the most part, you're now dealing with infrastructure as code, and you need to have a test environment that can orchestrate across those different, cloud, serving up infrastructure as code for cloud, as well as, in the case of hybrid, dedicated infrastructure as well. So your test environment management system has to be smart enough to deal with that, basically. And all of the things we talked about apply, not only setting up, but all the metrics and everything need to be brought back to the platform so that from the point of view of the developer or the users or the applications, they don't have to have separate procedures depending on what environment you're dealing with. The TEM should provide an abstraction layer that helps manage that.
Very cool. How do you, when you're helping companies go through this process, how do you typically help them cost justify what they get from a test environment management solution?
Yeah, so this is an interesting point because if you think about it, right, based on what we've already talked about in this presentation, even the ROI is usually not a problem. I mean, you can easily put together an ROI case based on the amount of time that's being wasted compared to the amount of time that will be saved. And so that's the primary way to build an ROI case to show the value of savings in terms of labor, equipment, licensing, cloud resources, and all of that. So this is the first step.
Very cool. I can see that Charlene has come on, which means our time is drawing to a close. There's more questions about testing and production, and do you still need it? Yes, you do. And by all means, reach back out to Mark and I, catch us on LinkedIn. There's a lot more here.
Yeah, well, please know if we didn't get to your question during the question and answer period, that Jeff and Mark are going to be getting a copy of all the questions that came in. So I'm sure they're going to be more than happy to follow up with you offline. But yeah, lots of great questions did come in, and I'm sorry that we had to cut it short today. But all is not lost. You will still get your question answered. Also want to remind the audience real quick that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following the webinar today, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. All right, we have about a minute left, so I want to go ahead and do the drawing for the 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, our first winner today is Brad S. Congratulations, Brad. Our second winner is Diana C. Congratulations, Diana. Our third winner today is Evelyn V. Congratulations, Evelyn. And our final winner today is Kim L. Congratulations, Kim. We'll be following up with you, following up offline with all 4 of you, easy for me to say, to get your Amazon gift card over to you. And if you don't see it in your inbox, please check your spam folder. Jeff and Mark, as always, great webinar, lots of great information. It's a really fascinating topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Hopefully we'll do another one on this topic pretty soon. But until then, this is, I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Please stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.